Have to live with that.
So we're going to start. Yeah, we're going to start at the beginning with what the Bay Area looked like 10,000 years ago. It looked a lot like this, and the human habitations looked a lot like what you're seeing. The hut is made out of tules or bulrush reeds, and local native tribes use those to make their habitations. And they also used those bulrushes to make canoes that would float, and they were able to get across the bay. This shows what it looked like in the early 1800s when they were crossing the bay. And incidentally, they did not cross the bay very much across the Golden Gate because the Golden Gate had really strong tides. And in one case, 4 Indians were swept out to the Farallon Islands by the tide in the Golden Gate. So it was dangerous to do that. So they generally didn't until the Spanish got here, and they began to go into the North Bay, but still it was a very difficult, hazardous, strenuous operation to get across the Golden Gate. And there I am 20 years ago looking at some grinding holes or mortar holes. These are holes in which the native tribal peoples pounded acorns and grass seeds to make the mush that they would then cook and eat. And their staple foods were grass seeds and mush. And when the first Spanish expedition got here in 1769, they were given black tamales made of grass seeds as well as acorn mush. But when they tried to make the acorn mush on their own, they all got sick because they didn't leach out the acid in the acorn. And the local tribal people had been doing that for thousands of years. They had to pour water over it about a dozen times over sand to leach out the acid. And then they could cook it, and it was delicious. So the native people also relied on the steelhead trout and salmon in the streams. And some of the streams still have salmon. In one case, Alameda Creek, there was no salmon for at least 100 years. And then last year, for the first time in 100 years, salmon came up that creek, Alameda Creek in the East Bay. This one is Stevens Creek in Santa Clara County, but all the creeks pretty much, that is, all the major creeks had salmon and steelhead trout, which was a protein-rich food that they all depended on, so much that they even sang songs about the salmon and trout. The Wapo people of the North Bay, they said Hayaka Melcow, which meant thank you, salmon. And that was their song. They repeated it again and again. Of course, the tribal life ended when the missions started, and it took about 10 or 20 years for all the Indians to be brought into the missions. They came voluntarily at first, but eventually they all had to join the missions because the Spanish cattle and horses and pigs and other livestock, they were eating the people's food, the tribal people's food. So the tribal people out in the villages had trouble getting food because these livestock were eating all their food, and so they had to join the missions in order to survive. The only place where they didn't absolutely have to join the missions was north of Sonoma Mission, because that mission only lasted 10 years. And so, like north of Santa Rosa, those tribes were able to survive without coming into the missions. However, here in San Francisco, all on the San Francisco Peninsula, all the Indians were brought into the missions at Santa Clara or Mission Dolores here in San Francisco by 1800. And this shows a crew of Indians who are working at the point of a lance by the Spanish soldier on a horse. And this is what the Presidio looked like. You can see the old Presidio, the old buildings of the Presidio, which were made of adobe. And the Indians were all carrying wood because firewood was needed and there wasn't that much on the hills of San Francisco. So, they usually had to walk a couple of miles to find some trees that they could cut for firewood. Of course, once the Indians were in all the missions were very unsanitary. They had no idea of, how germs worked and how sanitation worked. Nobody did at that time. And so diseases were rampant at the missions. It was like, imagine a campground with 1,000 people, but no restrooms, just holes in the ground. And people were all drinking out of the same stream, and the cattle and livestock were drinking out of the same stream. And it was a place where each of these missions was a place where epidemic after epidemic would go through the missions. And one of the worst ones was smallpox. That was after the missions had disbanded, but the Indians all over the Bay Area, some of them were still living at the missions in 1838. A smallpox epidemic just killed thousands of Indians. And after that, there were really much fewer Indians, like about by the end of that smallpox epidemic, probably 80% of the Indians had already died of diseases. So what expanded onto the landscape as the Indians dwindled, the cattle multiplied and multiplied and multiplied until by the time the American takeover came in 1846, just before the gold rush, there were 100,000 cattle in the Bay Area, but only 10,000 people. And those cattle, over the course of 130 years, they brought with them European grass seeds. And those grass seeds were annual grasses that are fast growing, very fast growing. They grow very close together. They produce lots of seeds, and they outcompete the native grasses. And so you had the conversion of native bunchgrass prairies into what we see now, which is the golden brown California landscape, but it's almost all non-native grasses. They're annual grasses, and of course they're more flammable because they grow very densely and they dry out in the spring, and then they're flammable for the next 6 months. And then, of course, the gold rush happened. The world rushed in. Mostly Americans rushed in, but there were people from all over the world who came in on these sailing ships like this. And then San Francisco got started as a big boom town, but San Francisco had a problem. In the early days, 1850 to 1852, in just 3 years, half the city burned down 5 times in just 3 years because there was no piped water supply, there was no fire department, there were no cisterns to be used. The only way to fight these fires was with a bucket brigade from the bay to the fire. Very ineffective, and so half the city burned down 5 times. One of the early industries which got going in those same years was the cement industry. This is down in Santa Cruz. It's now on the campus of UC Santa Cruz. The Cowell Cement Works, where they made cement out of limestone. They would quarry the limestone rock out of the surrounding hills. They would burn that limestone or fire that limestone, heat it up to about 3,000 degrees until it glowed. By the way, that's where you get the name, the term limelight. Limelight is from glowing limestone that you heat up really hot until it glows. Um, so here is a load of limestone cement in barrels uh, being pulled out of the place where they put it in the barrels, and it's on its way to the docks at Santa Cruz, and from there it goes in ships to San Francisco, because a lot of the business owners up in San Francisco, after their places burned down 2 or 3 times, they wanted to rebuild with brick, and they did. Um, Another big industry of the gold rush was the logging industry. And you can see some of the remains of that really all over the Bay Area. There are these very old stumps that were cut as far back as the 1850s. This is in Mill Valley. Mill Valley was logged out by 1852. Um, and they kept on cutting redwood forests elsewhere. The redwood forest in Redwood Regional Park up in the East Bay Hills, um, that area, 5 square miles of redwoods, logged out by 1855. They didn't leave a single tree up there. Just cut them all down and put them through. Well, let's go down on the peninsula. This is Redwood City. And by the way, a lot of the hills in back of Redwood City have redwoods, but Redwood City itself never had a single redwood growing. It was originally called the Redwood Embarcadero because that's where all the uh, redwood planks that were milled from the trees in Woodside and Portola Valley and La Honda, they were all brought down to the docks at Redwood City. And from there, they went to San Francisco and other places that needed to build houses, such as Sacramento and Stockton and Napa. And the demand for redwood in San Francisco was so great that the supply of redwoods in the Bay Area wasn't enough. So redwood cutting was going on in Mendocino County, and this place is called the Mendocino Lumber Yard, shown in the 1860s. You can see the sailing ships out there that brought the lumber into the lumber yard, and stacks of redwood that would go into building the city. Another big industry that has had lasting impact on the Bay Area is the mercury mining industry. There were a lot of mercury mines up in the Geysers area, the Mayacamas Mountains in between Napa and Sonoma counties. But the biggest mercury mine of all was called the Almaden. And it was the richest mercury mine, and not only the richest mercury mine, but the richest mine of any kind in California. It produced more wealth, more money for its owners than any gold mine in the whole state of California. So it was very lucrative business. It lasted for about 100 years, and then it kind of petered out. And you can go down and see the remnants of it at Almaden County Park. It's about 10 or 15 miles south of downtown San Jose. But you cannot see this anymore. It was torn down. It's the reduction works. It's where they would bring in the ore, the rocks that contained mercury, a rock called cinnabar, and they would heat up those rocks in a furnace, and the mercury would vaporize, and then the mercury vapor would go through a series of pipes, just like a whiskey still, and the mercury vapor would cool off, and it would turn into liquid mercury, and they would collect the liquid mercury at the end of those pipes. So this was going on for about 100 years, and not all of the mercury was collected in the cast iron flasks. Some of it, got on the ground, and so that ground is um, permanently polluted with mercury right now, and there's a little lake near it, uh, but nobody can fish in that lake because those fish are too polluted with mercury. And where did that mercury get used? Well, it went up into the gold mines of the Sierra Nevada. It went to the silver mines of Nevada and other states like Idaho. Wherever there was gold or silver mining, they used mercury because mercury has the amazing ability to dissolve gold into it. So if you have some crushed gold ore with, microscopic bits of gold in it, you mix mercury with it, and that mercury picks up those microscopic gold particles. They dissolve into the mercury. Then you collect the mercury. You heat it up to about 1,000 degrees, make it evaporate, um, and what's left is pure gold or pure silver, if that's what you're after. And of course, a lot of that mercury ended up in the rivers and streams of the Sierra, and that it's still polluting the fish up there in some of the reservoirs. And some of it came down to the bay and ended up on the bottom of San Pablo Bay. In fact, a billion cubic yards of sediment came from these hydraulic mines before 1884, and eventually it worked its way down to the North Bay. And in the South Bay, they were getting mercury from the Almaden mine and the nearby Guadalupe mine and the nearby Silver Creek mine. So that mercury got into the South Bay, and it's still there. Another mining related industry was smelting. This was the biggest smelter in the Bay Area, the Selby smelter. It was on the shore of San Pablo Bay, right near Carquinez Strait, right near where the Carquinez Bridge is right now. And they would take gold or silver or lead ore, and they would break it up and they would heat it, and they would make hot slag out of it, and they could get gold, silver, lead out of the ore. But they burned coal to do it. The coal created a lot of sulfur dioxide pollution, and farmers across the strait in Solano County were complaining. They thought that their livestock and their crops were being poisoned by the air pollution from this factory, this smelter. So the smelter built in the late 1930s. They built this smokestack, which was at the time the tallest smokestack in the world. It's about as tall as one of the towers on the Golden Gate Bridge. And of course, this smelter went out of business in 1970, when it could not comply with air pollution regulations. And the whole smokestack was dynamited in 1973. Here's what it looks like today: flat, covered with asphalt, because there's toxic metals in the ground underneath where that smelter was. So they had to cover it with asphalt so that it would not, so that every time it rained, the rain would not carry all the toxic metals into the bay. So that's why it looks like a big parking lot. This is the Hercules Explosives factory site that went out of business in about the mid 1970s. And I saw it about 20 years later. They hadn't yet built anything on it, but today it is housing. And a little bit about transportation, the building of the railroads. Here's the excavations that were being done with explosives up in the Sierra near Donner Pass. There's one of the Chinese workers. It took thousands of Chinese workers to build the railroad over the Sierras. And after they were finished, they got to build levees in the bay, around the bay and around the delta. Some of those delta islands, levees were built by the Chinese workers. And They also built more railroads. They built railroads from Oakland to Santa Cruz over the Santa Cruz Mountains, and they built two railroads um, from Sausalito and Tiburon up to the Russian River. And of course, the railroad that had the biggest impact on the Bay Area was the Transcontinental Railroad, finished in 1869. Uh, they arrived in Oakland, and then they went out onto the bay on a pier, and there they would, all the people on these transcontinental uh, journeys would then get on a ferry boat for uh, the last journey, the last bit of the journey, the last 4 miles into San Francisco. But of course, this was a tremendous, it made Oakland into a tremendous boom town, and all kinds of industries got going in Oakland in 1869, because then they could move products all over the United States on the railroad. A little more on transportation. Here we are in 1889 at the old ferry building, the previous ferry building. Um, and we see a lot of cable cars here, and they were moved by cables, of course, which were moved by those big wheels that you can still see turning and turning in the Cable Car Museum. And originally there was a powerhouse turning those cables, and that was fueled by coal. So there was a lot of coal pollution, coal air pollution in San Francisco in the late 1800s. And those small, what look like very small cable cars, if you look carefully, there are horses attached to them. Those are horse cars. And the cable cars actually went up and down Market Street. In addition to going up and down the hills, they went up and down Market Street, and they even went up and down Castro Street until 1940. But horses were still very important in transportation throughout the Bay Area. And here's some horses in San Francisco that were used to move these railway express wagons. This one was owned by a company called American Railway Express. It's the package delivery service. So they would go down to the railroad yards and pick up all the packages off the trains and then deliver them to homes and businesses throughout the city. And these horses are getting refueled by oats, which are in the oat bags on their faces. Horses were also used by a lot of different vendors that went through the streets, but here we had early curbside recycling. So late 1800s, early 1900s, some of the scavengers went around with a wagon and calling out rags, bottles, sacks, and people would come out of their houses and bring them these recyclable materials. There were 15,000 horses in San Francisco around 1900. They needed to get hay every day, lots of it. The hay was brought in by scow schooners. You can see some of those scow schooners in the background, flat bottom schooners that could go on the shallow sloughs of the bay, like to places like Alvarado and Alviso. And they would pick up loads of hay and bring it to the hay wharf, which is now China Basin. And of course, along with agriculture, there came a few unwanted weeds like the yellow star thistle, first noticed in Solano County after some farmers got some alfalfa seeds and other grain seeds from Chile, which had a few yellow star thistle seeds in it. And yellow star thistle is native to the Mediterranean basin and Turkey. But it made its way to Chile and then to Solano County, and pretty soon it was all over the Bay Area, and it became the most harmful weed in that once it took over a grassland, there was no food for cattle or wildlife that ate plants because they could not eat this thing. It was inedible, and you can see why. And here's San Francisco's most invasive plant today, the Oxalis pescaprae, which means Oxalis foot of goat, um, also called Bermuda buttercup or sour grass. You can see it right now in almost every piece of ground in the city has this invasive weed. And I first saw it around 1968, 69. It wasn't very common, but now it's everywhere. It's on the march and it's taking over. And it's extremely hard to get rid of. So everywhere you see it, it will always be. And because it's so prevalent everywhere, it's going to keep invading more and more and just taking over. And it's really bad because there's, again, there's no animal that eats this. And when it dries out in April or May, it leaves a barren patch of ground. So it gets rid of all other plants, and then it dries out and leaves a barren patch of ground for 6 months. Another early industry was hunting. There were people called market hunters. There were no limits on hunting, so you could any wildlife was fair game. You could kill as many of them as you wanted, whether it be bear or elk or deer or waterfowl. There were men who made their living by killing lots of them and then selling them to butcher shops in San Francisco. And here's a picture of how difficult it was to kill a grizzly bear. And by the way, that was the only type of bear that lived in California below 4,000 feet elevation. There were grizzly bears everywhere. Even on the beaches in San Francisco, they feasted on the carcasses of whales. But yeah, in the 1850s, it was challenging to kill one because they only had one-shot rifles, and so it was a dangerous business. And it became a lot easier in the 1870s when they had repeating rifles. So you could fire several shots, and the grizzly didn't have a chance one way or the other. But the grizzly could fight back if you only had a one-shot rifle. And a grizzly actually killed one of the early loggers, William Waddell, in Santa Cruz County in 1875. This is the last grizzly in San Francisco. It's not a San Francisco native, but you may have actually seen this grizzly because it was stuffed and exhibited in the California Academy of Sciences from 1912 to 2008. And its name was Monarch. It became the model for the bear on the California flag. But it was living after all the grizzlies of the Bay Area had already been killed. The last one was killed in Santa Cruz County in 1886. William Randolph Hearst sent out a reporter to find a grizzly, if there were any left anywhere in California, find it, bring it back alive. It took more than a year, but the reporter eventually came back with this grizzly, and Hearst named it Monarch after his San Francisco Examiner newspaper, which he called the Monarch of the Dailies. So you can see him in a cage at Golden Gate Park until he died in 1911. The fishing industry was also another major industry in the Bay Area. Here's Fisherman's Wharf when they were still using these lateen-sailed sailboats to catch fish, and it was mainly Greek and Italian fishermen who were using these same boats that they used in the Mediterranean. They didn't allow the Chinese to fish for fish. So the Chinese were, intimidated and beaten if they tried to fish for fish. So what they were allowed to fish for was shrimp. There was bay shrimp. These were very small shrimp. They're not the kind of shrimp that we eat today, but they were the native shrimp to the bay. And there were 8 or 10 fishing villages at any given time in the late 1800s where the Chinese shrimp fishermen would have their boats and their villages for drying the shrimp. They would dry the shrimp out and ship them to China. And the last of these, second to the last of these was at Hunters Point, and it closed when the Navy opened its Hunters Point Naval Shipyard. And then there was one that kept on going even longer, China Camp in Marin County. It's now a state park. It's been preserved. And the oldest uh, Chinese shrimp fisherman was still there as late as 2016. And as late as the 2005, 2010, he was still selling shrimp. There wasn't many shrimp left, but he'd still go out. He'd go out and trap them with their special nets that they had. And here they are at Hunters Point processing their catch in the early 1900s. Now, the commercial fishing industry in the bay, it began to be restricted because there weren't as many salmon anymore. So, and the striped bass, which incidentally is not native to the bay, was brought in 1879 by train. It was a week-long journey. It was, very difficult for the State Fish Commission and the National Fish Commission. They caught these little fingerling striped bass in New Jersey, in the estuaries of New Jersey, and they were able to put them in barrels and put them on the train and keep them alive. It was very strenuous work for the scientists who were on that train trying to keep those fish alive. They were putting in ice to try to keep it cool as it went across the country. In any case, once they got them in the bay, they really thrived. They soon became the most common edible fish in the bay. But eventually, the commercial fishermen were catching so many of them that the catch was declining rapidly. In the 1930s, commercial fishing in the bay for striped bass was banned. And later, commercial fishing in the bay for salmon was also banned. And what that meant was that the recreational fishermen had a bonanza of striped bass fishing and salmon fishing, which my grandfather took part in the 1960s. But of course, that didn't last because the two great aqueducts started sucking all the baby fish out of the delta, and then the salmon and the striped bass declined rapidly after 1970. Now, a little bit about the water history. The first piped water supply in San Francisco came from Lobos Creek in the Presidio, but the city at that time was 4 miles away and over several hills. So they built a flume to get the water around Fort Point, and that flume continued through the Marina District and around the other point where Fort Mason is, and it deposited the water where Ghirardelli Square is now, and then a pump house pumped it over the hill to the Heights, Nob Hill, where the first customers got their piped water, and eventually the pipes were laid all over the city, but it took about 40 years to lay pipes all over the city. Well, of course, Lobos Creek, as the city grew, Lobos Creek was not providing enough water. There was very limited supply. So the Spring Valley Water Company, which had a monopoly on water in San Francisco, they built 5 dams in the Crystal Springs watershed. This is the last one in 1888. They built dams that were bigger and bigger and bigger until this one was the biggest concrete dam in the world at the time in 1888. And right now it's underneath the Duran Bridge on I-280 in San Mateo County. But eventually those water sources were still not enough for San Francisco. So San Francisco started looking towards the Sierra for water sources. They looked at Tahoe and said, well, that might not work out. But eventually the city fathers, such as the mayor Phelan, they secretly bought up the water rights to the Tuolumne River, and then they convinced Congress to pass a law allowing them to build the dam in Yosemite National Park right here. This was a valley as beautiful as Yosemite, but San Francisco decided that the greatest good for this valley would be to put a dam here, make it a lake, and then it would provide water to the city, which it did. But after they built the dam, it took 10 years for the water to get here because they had to build a tunnel from Tracy to Fremont to get the water underneath the Coast Range. And then, of course, they had to build a pipeline bridge across where the Dumbarton Bridge is. And eventually it did get there in 1934. And the architect of the whole thing, who had shepherded this project for 20 years, was Michael M. O'Shaughnessy. That's who O'Shaughnessy Drive is named after. And so it's O'Shaughnessy Dam, named after him. And when the whole system had been completed, they put together a big celebration down at a place called the Pulgas Water Temple, which is still there. And formerly, you used to be able to walk right up to that water temple and look down and see the water, pouring out of the pipe and starting to go down to the Crystal Springs lakes. Well, Mr. O'Shaughnessy, by that time, he was around 70 years old. He had done his job and he didn't make it to the ceremony. He died after 20 years of working on this and completing the project. He died of a heart attack 3 weeks before the ceremony. But his work had been completed. And he was also the architect of the tunnels, the Muni tunnels, the N. Judah tunnel, and the Twin Peaks tunnel. And yeah, as far as water supply, most of this water does not go to the Bay Area. This is the California Aqueduct, opened in the late 60s, and it was even bigger than the Federal Aqueduct, which opened around 1950. And both of those aqueducts suck gigantic amounts of water out of the Delta and down to the San Joaquin Valley. And this one, the California Aqueduct, in 1972, it was extended with pipes over the Tehachapi Mountains, pipes and pumps. And Governor Ronald Reagan flipped a switch, and that water started moving over the Tehachapi Mountains into the cities of Southern California. But yeah, that's where most of the water from the Sacramento River water, most of the Sacramento River water ends up going south in these aqueducts, along with all those baby fish. And that's why we don't have many salmon or striped bass in the bay anymore. Now, the environmental movement got started in the Bay Area, not with John Muir. I mean, he was great. He founded the Sierra Club in 1890 and got Yosemite National Park established in 1892. But John Muir didn't do anything to save any of the natural areas of the Bay Area. That started with the woman on the right, Josephine Clifford McCracken. She, in 1899, along with Andrew Hill, a photographer in San Jose, they started a group called the Sempervirens League to save the redwoods. And this woman came up with the slogan, "Save the Redwoods," which is still used today by anybody trying to save redwoods. And they were successful in saving a 5 square mile area of redwood forest that became the first state park in California. It was the only state park. We now call it Big Basin State Park. And it opened in 1904, and this is what it looked like when people went camping in Big Basin in 1904. This area, Berry Creek, with its 3 waterfalls, this is just one of the 3 waterfalls in Berry Creek. This was added to Big Basin State Park in 1968. And it's a really beautiful area, but it's most people never see it because you have to hike 5 miles from Waddell Creek Beach or 5 miles from the park headquarters to see this waterfall, and then you have to hike another 5 miles back. So you can see it backpacking, or you can see it on a 10-mile hike. But it's really beautiful, especially in the winter and spring. And another guy who was involved in saving the redwoods was the man on the left, William Kent. He gets all the credit for saving Muir Woods, and indeed he was responsible for buying it and then giving it to the federal government. And Teddy Roosevelt immediately declared it a national monument so that nobody else could get their hands on it and cut the trees. But where did he get the idea to buy Muir Woods? Well, he got the idea from a guy named Lovell White. Lovell White was a banker whose bank owned Muir Woods. Probably owned it as a result of, collateral for some loan or whatever. Anyway, the bank was, Lovell White needed to sell Muir Woods, and every buyer would have cut it down except for William Kent. He was the guy who wanted to create a national park on Mount Tamalpais. And he never succeeded in doing that, but he did, establish this national monument at the foot of Mount Tamalpais. But of course, so Lovell White came to him, and he said, "Okay, I'll buy it." It was the equivalent of about $2 million today, but Kent was fairly wealthy. But where did the banker Lovell White get the idea to sell Muir Woods to William Kent? Well, none of the histories tell this, and I had to infer this from circumstantial evidence, but it was his wife, Lovell White's wife, Laura Lyon White. She was the head of the Sempervirens League in 1903 to 1905, and she put the bug in her husband's ear and said, "You can't sell this to anybody who's going to log those trees. You have to sell it to William Kent. He's the only guy who would buy it and save it." And that's what happened. And you heard it from me first. Another of the early environmentalists in San Francisco was Adolf Sutro. He was the first Jewish mayor of San Francisco, and he thought that he would improve the environment by planting thousands of trees. And so he hired unemployed people to plant thousands of trees on his 2 square miles of land south of Parnassus Street, all the way down to the Ocean View neighborhood. And that was a solid eucalyptus forest because the eucalyptus grew so fast that it shaded out all the other trees. All the other seedlings died. Only the eucalyptus survived. And so it became Sutro Forest. After Sutro died, his heirs sold a lot of that land to developers. They cut down the eucalyptus, but part of his forest is still there. Sutro Forest on Mount Sutro and Mount Davidson. So he really thought that he was doing a great environmental good deed. We now know that eucalyptus is not good for the native ecosystems of California, and it's extremely flammable. But he did do one other good thing, which environmentalists, could thank him for today. He had this mansion over near the Cliff House, and from his mansion, he could see that on the weekends, young men with guns, rifles, would come out to the Cliff House, and they would shoot sea lions just for fun. And Sutro was appalled at the cruelty of shooting those sea lions just for fun and seeing them bleed to death on seal rocks. So he got in touch with the president of the United States and had the president declare Seal Rocks the first marine sanctuary in the United States.
unfortunately, we are going to need to wrap it up because we would like, there are many more stories and you can.
Oh, I gotta have some time to sign books.
That's right.
So, yeah, so sorry to interrupt this wonderful flow of information. I think we skipped Dave a big hand.
Well, thank you.
But unfortunately, we only got this room till 8:30.
Oh, no.
And so we want to have enough time for everybody
Yeah,
to wrap it up
There's-
a little bit and eat some more snacks
okay.
and find out many more stories by getting Dave's book here while he's got it here.
And this is really the only history of the environmental movement in the Bay Area is in this book. So I'm sure you will all enjoy that. And some of our local environmentalists, like David Schooley, who's here today, is mentioned a couple of times in the book. He's the co-founder of San Bruno Mountain Watch and has been working for well over 50 years to save San Bruno Mountain with a lot of success, not 100% success, but you can't completely defeat all the developers who are trying to develop San Bruno Mountain, but they saved at least 80% of it, and it's a great environmental victory for San Bruno Mountain Watch, who is still active in restoration, in ecological restoration, and David Schooley is still active in trail building on San Bruno Mountain.
We have the author of the field guide of San Bruno Mountain.
Yes, that's David Nelson right there, author of the field guide to San Bruno Mountain. A great book, well worth whatever he's selling it for. So my book, I gotta tell you, it's 632 pages long, but it's got 20 different topics, and each of those 20 chapters is the history of a different topic, such as transportation or logging or mining or the environmental movement. So there's a lot in here. And many people have told me there's never been a book like this. And so I encourage you to take a look at it. And if you want to buy it, I'm offering it at a discount today. If you buy this thing in a store, it's going to cost you $65. So $60 plus tax. If you buy it today from me, $40, no tax. And I will sign it for you. And I will take cash or credit card. So thanks y'all for coming. And yeah, I appreciate everyone who made it here.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Okay. Come to the front line. San Bruno Mountain guide. We'll see if it actually works. Oh, there you go. You find a guy. Forget it. I know what you find. I should bring it.
The royal.
Yes.
As you lay in line, feel free to pay. Pass back the look at it.
Yeah. Actually, well, I got you. I might look by two. Sorry. Yeah, so I'm thinking, yeah. My wife and I used when I was all the secrets from Naturalist Society, you might have been, we counted, we used to manage the random museum for, if you remember. Earth came down in one big deluge. That was 1232. And it wiped out the trees that were this big, about 200 feet from the top. And the top of Buckeye. So interesting that it came down. That was right. So it doesn't happen every time. So it came down.
And if you were to find sign real quick, you can just make it out.
The other part
Maybe
is
it's in here.
the deposition, it's a transition all the way down. And I think there are extensions, they're large folders, all at the middle, then they get smaller, and at the bottom, it's broadening out. Okay, so it's erosion, transition, deposition. So at the bottom, it's now all around the. So one of the things we did. Sections of blocks that are washed out. And then I'm polishing them in the kind of rings. And I'm and more or less.
I really appreciate it. This is, that's 5 years. And if you can sign it.
No. This actually plus some. And the trees were down there.
Work at the zero, I think just my boss.
Excellent. You're not visiting with body, look like that. So, I think I'm sure.
Yeah, my kind of thought.
That.
Thank you.
So. And probably because you're my mom's got very few little kids.
She was different.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of someone called Brad?
So that is it.
Bradley sisters.
Ellie.
Re-educated areas. You don't detect me. You don't even so that's what we look for. Right. And I should know about it all the time. So maybe what you guys do. There's more land.
I think how you build this house.
Should I,
Because part of not walk. Can you not walk? Make a whole number out of the air. You're back.
so everybody came.
So make it, so that never mind. Right. I get it. I get it. This is helping. Very.
She couldn't believe it.
But just barely. Yeah.
And I'll be new.
Well, what it seems is. Just
I do like, I bring the car service to work.
Just about. That's.
Our figures. Yeah. Yeah, so we're just gonna put it, so we're gonna resubmit, we're gonna let our volunteers borrow it, but we're also gonna have library. Then you'll actually watch your guy and probably like in there, like, so that. Yes,
And you want.
How they wanna go last from there.
So we should, on top, 30. Again, all right. See ya.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, we got a paper, line, oh, we got her, all right, yeah. Yeah, I'm just, no, sorry. It's like. You're a mega fan to, fly it. Oh, that's true.
Oh, and there's part two.
I mean, there are, yeah, there's places where you got to a staff.
Well, and I gotta figure. I'll have plenty of time to.
All right, all right. Alex, you get one.
Thanks so much for looking at that. This is fantastic. Yeah. That's awesome. Bye. This guy. Remember that?
Yeah.
Right.
There's traffic control.
Fair against the system. Yeah, and I think those.
We'll see ya.
All right.